There is a volcanic island sitting in the Atlantic Ocean, whose western flank, a chunk of rock estimated at 500 cubic kilometers, is slowly, measurably, unstably sliding toward the sea. When it goes, the wave it generates will not be a normal tsunami. The models, peer-reviewed, published, debated fiercely in the scientific community, project a wall of water between 25 and 50 meters high, striking the coastlines of West Africa within an hour, the Iberian Peninsula within 2 hours, and the eastern seaboard of the United States, New York, Miami, Boston, within 8 to 9 hours. Waves projected at 10 to 25 meters, arriving at some of the most densely populated coastlines on the planet. This is not a fringe theory, this is not internet speculation. This is a scenario that has been formally modeled by researchers at University College London, debated in the pages of peer-reviewed geophysical journals, and quietly incorporated into the long-range planning of agencies that do not like to discuss it publicly. The island is La Palma. The flank is the Cumbre Vieja volcanic ridge. And right now, following the 2021 eruption that reactivated the entire system, the instruments monitoring that flank are not showing stabilization. They are showing the opposite. Let's get into it. Before we get into the specific threat, you need to understand what the Canary Islands are geologically, because they are not what most people think they are. The Canary Islands are not a standard volcanic island chain produced by a spreading ridge or a subduction zone. They are a hotspot archipelago, a chain of volcanic islands produced by a mantle plume punching through the African tectonic plate from below. As the African plate moves slowly over this fixed hotspot, successive islands are built up from the seafloor by repeated volcanic activity over millions of years. The geological ages of the islands reflect this progression. The easternmost islands, Fuerteventura and Lanzarote, are the oldest, having passed over the hotspot millions of years ago. The westernmost islands, La Palma and El Hierro, are the youngest, still sitting directly above the hotspot and still volcanically active. La Palma, in particular, is one of the most volcanically active islands in the entire Atlantic basin. But hotspot islands have a structural characteristic that makes them fundamentally different from continental volcanoes, and fundamentally more dangerous from a tsunami perspective. They are built fast. Magma piles up rapidly, constructing enormous volcanic edifices on the ocean floor over geologically short timescales. And because they are built fast, they are not always built stably. The flanks of oceanic hotspot volcanoes are prone to catastrophic collapse, sudden massive failures where an entire side of the island shears away and slides into the ocean in a single event. This is not a theoretical risk invented for La Palma. It is a documented geological process with a well-established record across the Atlantic basin. The seafloor around the Canary Islands is littered with the debris of previous flank collapses, enormous aprons of collapsed rock material extending hundreds of kilometers from the islands across the ocean floor. Scientists have identified more than a dozen major collapse events in the geological history of the Canary Islands alone. These collapses happened before. They will happen again. The question, the one that makes La Palma specifically the focus of serious scientific concern, is whether one of them is closer than comfortable. A chain of volcanic vents running along the southern half of the island that has been the site of repeated eruptions in historical times. 1949, 1971, and most recently 2021. The 1949 eruption is the event that first brought the western flank instability to scientific attention. During that eruption, a section of the western flank of Cumbre Vieja dropped by approximately 4 meters toward the ocean, along a series of faults that had not previously been mapped. The flank didn't collapse, but it moved. It demonstrated that the western flank is not rigidly attached to the rest of the island. It is sitting on a system of faults, and it is capable of displacement. In 2001, Stephen Ward of the University of California, Santa Cruz, and Simon Day of University College London published the paper that put this scenario on the scientific map globally. Their modeling, using the geometry of the unstable flank, estimated collapse volume, and established tsunami generation physics, projected mega-tsunami waves of extraordinary scale striking Atlantic coastlines. The paper was peer-reviewed and published in Geophysical Research Letters, one of the most respected journals in the field. The scientific debate that followed was vigorous, and it continues. Other researchers have challenged specific assumptions in the Ward and Day model, particularly the assumption of a single instantaneous collapse of the entire unstable flank versus a more gradual piecemeal failure over a longer time frame. A piecemeal failure would generate significantly smaller waves. And the consensus that emerged from the debate was that a single instantaneous collapse of the entire flank is probably not the most likely failure mode. Here is what that debate obscures, however. Even a partial collapse, a section of the flank, not the entire volume, would generate a tsunami event well beyond the scale of anything the Atlantic basin has experienced in recorded human history. The debate about total versus partial collapse is a debate about the difference between catastrophic and civilization ending. It is not a debate about whether a significant mega-tsunami is possible from this location. It is possible. The geological record confirms it happened here before, and the 2021 eruption changed the calculation in ways that have not been adequately communicated to the public. In September 2021, the Cumbre Vieja volcanic system erupted. The eruption lasted 85 days, the longest eruption in La Palma's recorded history. It destroyed over 3,000 buildings, buried entire neighborhoods under lava, and displaced thousands of residents. The footage was extraordinary and covered globally. What was not covered globally, what received almost no mainstream attention, was what the eruption did to the structural integrity of the western flank. Volcanic eruptions on island volcanoes do two things to flank stability simultaneously. First, the intrusion of magma into the edifice during an eruption inflates the volcanic structure, physically pushing the flanks outward from the inside. GPS measurements during the 2021 eruption showed significant lateral displacement of the western flank, consistent with magma intrusion loading the fault system that the 1949 eruption had already revealed. Second, the eruption deposited enormous volumes of new lava on the upper slopes of the southern island, adding mass to the top of an already unstable structure. More mass at the top means more gravitational loading on the flank below. The same faults that moved in 1949, that shifted again during the 2021 intrusion, are now supporting a heavier load than they were before. Following the end of the 2021 eruption, monitoring agencies installed additional GPS stations and seismic sensors, specifically to track the post-eruption behavior of the western flank. The data from those instruments has been referenced in scientific publications and monitoring reports in language that is careful but informative. The flank has not restabilized to pre-eruption baseline. Ground deformation measurements continue to show slow seaward movement of sections of the western flank above pre-eruption rates. The fault system revealed in 1949 and reactivated during 2021 remains active, and the volcanic system beneath La Palma, fed by the same mantle hotspot that has been building these islands for millions of years, has not returned to dormancy. Seismic monitoring beneath the island continues to record the kind of deep volcanic tremor that indicates ongoing magmatic activity at depth. A flank that moved during the eruption, continued slow displacement post-eruption, ongoing deep volcanic activity, and a heavier structure sitting on top of an already compromised fault system. Let me walk you through what the models say happens if a significant section of the Cumbre Vieja western flank enters the ocean, because the numbers are important and they are not widely known. The initial collapse in ocean entry generates what's called an impulse wave, a wave created not by seafloor displacement the way a standard earthquake tsunami is generated, but by the direct physical impact of an enormous volume of rock hitting the water at high velocity. The energy input is enormous, and it is concentrated. The initial wave height close to the collapse site is projected in various models at between 600 and 900 meters, a transient wave that rapidly diminishes with distance but does so from an extraordinary starting height. At the Canary Islands themselves and the immediately surrounding ocean, the wave energy is lethal and total. At the Canary Islands themselves and the immediately surrounding ocean, the wave energy is lethal and total. There is no survival scenario on La Palma's coastline for a population in the collapse zone. As the wave propagates outward, it diminishes. But even significantly diminished, the numbers at target coastlines are extraordinary. The West African coastline, Morocco, Mauritania, Senegal, receives waves within 1 to 2 hours. Projected heights of 25 to 100 meters at the nearshore, depending on coastal geometry and local bathymetry. The Moroccan and West African coast has minimal tsunami warning infrastructure, and evacuation planning for an event at this scale does not exist. The Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, within 2 to 3 hours. Lisbon, which was devastated by a tsunami in 1755, following the Great Lisbon earthquake, sits directly in the propagation path. Projected wave heights for the Portuguese coast range from 10 to 30 meters depending on the collapse scenario modeled. The United Kingdom and France within 3 to 4 hours. Lower projected wave heights due to greater distance and the geographic sheltering of the English Channel, but still potentially significant for low-lying coastal areas, and the eastern United States. 8 to 9 hours of travel time across the Atlantic, Florida, the Carolinas, New York, Boston. The models that project the highest wave heights at the U.S. East Coast, the Ward and Day scenario, show waves of 10 to 25 meters arriving at coastlines that have no tsunami warning infrastructure calibrated for an Atlantic source, and where public awareness of Atlantic tsunami risk is essentially zero. 8 to 9 hours sounds like enough time to evacuate. It is not, for several reasons. The warning systems that would detect and communicate this threat are not designed for this source. Public compliance with tsunami evacuation orders in areas with no tsunami culture or experience is not comparable to Pacific coastlines. And the evacuation infrastructure, the roads, the signage, the public education, simply does not exist at the scale required on the U.S. East Coast. I want to be fair to the full scientific picture here, because this topic has been subject to both overclaiming and dismissal, and neither serves you. The researchers who have challenged the Ward and Day model raise legitimate points. The assumption of a single instantaneous collapse of 500 cubic kilometers of rock is not supported by the behavior of most documented volcanic flank collapses, which tend to occur in stages over extended timeframes. A staged collapse, sections of the flank failing sequentially over years, decades, or centuries, would generate a series of significant but not mega-scale tsunamis rather than one civilization-scale event. Additionally, some researchers have argued that the geological evidence for the instability of the Cumbre Vieja western flank has been overstated, that the fault systems revealed in 1949 may represent local adjustment rather than a coherent failure plane across the entire flank volume. These are valid scientific arguments. The debate is ongoing and has not been resolved. But here is what both sides of the debate agree on. The Cumbre Vieja western flank is not stable. It has moved. It continues to move. The volcanic system beneath it remains active. And at some point in the geological future, on a timescale that could be tomorrow, could be 100 years, could be 1,000 years, a significant mass of rock from this location will enter the Atlantic Ocean and generate a tsunami of extraordinary scale. The debate is about size and timing, not about weather, and the 2021 eruption, an event that postdates most of the published modeling, has loaded the system in ways that have not yet been fully incorporated into updated public risk assessments. The gap between the scientific understanding of this risk and the public policy response to it is extraordinary. The United States has a Pacific Tsunami Warning Center. It has deep ocean tsunami detection buoys positioned throughout the Pacific. It has public education campaigns, tsunami evacuation signage, and community drill programs in Pacific coastal states. This infrastructure exists because the Pacific has a documented history of tsunami events affecting U.S. coastlines. The Atlantic has essentially none of this. There is no Atlantic equivalent of the Pacific warning system calibrated for a Canary Islands source. The deep ocean buoy coverage in the eastern Atlantic is sparse. Public awareness of Atlantic tsunami risk on the U.S. East Coast is negligible, and the evacuation planning for a scenario where 8 hours of warning is available, which should theoretically be enough time, has not been developed at any level commensurate with the projected consequences. 8 hours of warning for a 25-meter wave arriving at Miami Beach, at Coney Island, at the Outer Banks. 8 hours that could save hundreds of thousands of lives. If the warning systems, the communication infrastructure, and the public knowledge existed to use them. They don't. And the reason they don't is a policy and communication failure, not a scientific one. The science has been published, the models have been peer-reviewed, the risk has been formally assessed. What has not followed is the institutional response that the science warrants. Here is what I want you to take from this. The Canary Islands mega-tsunami scenario is not fringe science. It is peer-reviewed, instrumentally monitored, geologically documented risk, centered on a volcanic flank that moved in 1949, moved again in 2021, and has not restabilized since. The debate about exactly how large the wave would be and exactly when the collapse will occur does not change the fundamental reality. This is a genuine unaddressed risk to some of the most densely populated coastlines in the world. If you live on the U.S. East Coast, on the Iberian Peninsula, or anywhere on the Atlantic Basin, this is a risk you have almost certainly never been told to think about. That is not because the scientists don't think about it. It is because the institutions responsible for public risk communication have found it easier not to. I'll keep tracking the monitoring data coming out of La Palma. The post-2021 deformation measurements, the seismic activity beneath Cumbre Vieja, any new published modeling that updates the risk picture. Because the Atlantic is not as safe as the absence of warning infrastructure suggests it is.